All right, Beth, we are here to answer some questions from our recent webinar on running the room when the room outranks you. So I'm looking forward to this.
Excellent.
We had a lot of questions about redirecting the focus, keeping things on track, having bosses or people who are more senior than you, maybe unintentionally doing some disruptive behavior. So asking sidelining questions and interrupting, maybe having a tendency to dominate conversations, just talking too much, repeating themselves, or helping to kind of guide leaders who might go rogue in public meetings and depart from the plan structure. So I've kind of lumped this all together to be the big boss is doing things that is not supporting the meeting, and but they're more senior than you. So what do you do in that situation?
Yeah. Excellent question. And it's a very common thing, the dynamic. All of us have made these mistakes too, even as meeting participants. But if I know I'm going into a situation where my boss might go rogue or my boss's boss might go rogue, I'm really thinking about preventions first. How can I prevent this from occurring? So what I'm going to do is either, I mean, ideally, if you have a relationship with the person you're worried about, going in, having a brief conversation with them in advance, saying, "Hey, I want to make sure we hear from everyone. So I want to make sure you're on board to make that I can facilitate to hear from everyone." I might say something just gently. And I'd also at the very beginning say, do some kind of prevention like, "Hey, we got a lot to cover today, and I might pull you back in. I might rein you in because we have an hour together and I want to make sure we hit all the things we need to hit." So how do you intervene gracefully? That's the key, right? What do you do that's not career limiting? So one thing to say is something like, "Hey, that sounds like you're bringing up something that we hadn't planned for today. Do we want to pivot toward that, or shall we stay on the path that we had designed for?" And you do it with a tone that is not, in any way incriminating to them. Like you're not frustrated, you're just curious. Really, curiosity is the thing, because ultimately they might have an idea that you do want to pivot to. So having pat phrases to say in those moments, or it sounds like whatever. It sounds like you're bringing up a topic that we hadn't planned for today. Oh, I can appreciate that that's a concern that you have. And right now, I'd love to finish talking about the problem before we move to that. Or I'd love to finish, can we finish this before we move on to that? Because that's really important too. And I'd really like to continue and finish what we had started. So having things ready to go that become natural habits of what to say when you don't know what to say, that's really what we're establishing here. If you can practice this even at home, instead of reacting and having that'll never work, or no, we're not going to do that, whatever you would normally naturally as a habit that you would say, you want to change that habit with some other phrase, or uh, even thank you. I think you said, Rachel, is always really helpful to say thank you. And right now we need to handle this before we go on to that. Does that work for you? Is that okay? I think having that ready to go really saves you, and really practicing at home will help you make it more accessible. Is there anything you'd add, Rachel?
No, I love it. I think just to recap, everything that you touched on is so powerful. It's like setting up the role. Here I am. I'm not trying to be above you, but I'm tasked with facilitating this process so that it's very clear. And it's like, it makes it clear that you're not trying to exert control. You're just, this is my job here today. And then intervening gracefully, but also being willing to pivot and check it out with them and say, is this what you want to do? Having a handful of key phrases in your back pocket so that you know you can, in a respectful, properly deferential way, say, well, this is what we were doing. Is that where you want to go? And then choosing to go there together, letting them, you're leading the process, but they're choosing the way. I think is really, yeah, no, I think you nailed it. That's great
I
to.
think, people are grateful that you're helping them out in that way. Because sometimes we all make mistakes by going left when we should be going right because we got curious about something. It's oftentimes like most people will appreciate that you're bringing bringing them back. bringing them back to where we should be. So,
And I think one thing I'll really add to this is that uh, this is almost more of a philosophical wondering, but it's like part of the job is just being really curious and listening well, being able to summarize. Here's what it sounds like you're saying. Does this mean that you want to go there? And we can only do that well if we're not in our own head about being scared about, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired, right? So we have
yeah,
to put our attention on how can I be of service to this group process? And I love what you said. People are grateful. And so if we can focus on that, then we'll be a little less terrified and
yeah,
a little more
exactly.
effective.
Exactly. Our second question, Rachel, is how do you overcome a gap, like in leadership, their role, your role, when you're even younger than the rest, and or you're early in your career?
Yeah, this is such a great question because this is exactly where we have those nerves of like, am I doing it right? I don't want to make anybody mad. What's the power dynamic in the room? And so it's important to understand the power dynamic in the room, to understand that there are different sets of needs coming into play depending on, what perspective. It's our job to manage that if we're tasked with managing the process. And so I think really just kind of naming it for ourselves, going, oh, yeah, this is a situation where it feels high stakes. I have some nerves about it. And then doing what we were just talking about a moment ago of recognizing that we can only be effective if we make our attention less about, am I doing it right? And more about getting curious. What is happening in the environment? What is the content that's being spoken? How can I be of service in that way? And I think it's important to, as you said in the first question, really name the role, set it up on the front end. Like, here's who is doing what in this meeting. I am tasked with being the meeting facilitator. That means I'm going to handle the process. That means I might have to interrupt at some time if we're getting close to time. It doesn't mean what you're saying isn't important. I'm just here to keep us on track. So it's like we deputize ourselves in that way by just getting that role clarity. And that creates a sense of courage to do that job then. And so I think really it's about relying on process, not power. Making sure that we say, okay, at every step of the way, being really explicit and clear about this is what we are planning to do now, and getting agreement from those leaders in the room. This is the plan. Are you on board? Great, let's move forward. Right. So it might take a little bit of, if you're very early in your career, I recommend paying very close attention, getting really curious, noticing people's habits and situations, being like a little, anthropologist or like someone in the wild looking around and saying, how does this room function? And how can I get in there and bring a process that will support that functioning? But also bring your whole self because that's the way we're really successful. What would you add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. Just authorizing yourself, and managing your own anxiety about it. And if you hold yourself in the position and even the mindset of my job here is to do this. And I love that process, not the people. It's managing the process, right?
Mhm.
um if you have that mindset, like this is my job, this is what they're relying on me for, versus, oh, I shouldn't, I'm less powerful, I'm minimize your role. Remember, it's your job. So
Yeah.
I think that's really helps, and they'll remember also that they'll appreciate it, and
Yes.
it's a good look. they'll
Yes.
you'll become known for it, and they'll respect you for it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. All right. And I love what you said about authorizing yourself. This might go to our next question a little bit. Like, what are some politically correct ways when you're starting a meeting to ensure that one of the first steps is to establish the ground rules with senior leaders? How do you do
Yeah.
that in a politically correct way?
Well, politically correct is just to tell the truth without blame or judgment, and to just say what needs to happen. Like, in order for us to get through all that we have to cover in the next hour, I'd like to put some ground rules in place. Sometimes I don't even use the words ground rules. Let's just establish how we'll work together in the next hour. I want to make sure that we hear from everybody. I love to do that, especially when there's power dynamics in the room. If you say, I want to hear from everybody, I want to make sure we hear from everybody. And another easy thing to say casually, not a rule. Maybe that's the thing that sounds too formal for you, especially in a power dynamic environment. Is to say, hey, let's make sure we watch how, if you're going over time, or if I'm concerned about time, I'm going to rein us all in. That's another way to gently, politically correctly, just gently put in some guardrails in place. I think that's what how I put it in my own mind. It's like when to avoid the gutters at the bowling alley, they have those little bumpers that come up. I'm establishing some bumpers so that we don't move into the gutter, I guess.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I think the only thing I would add to that, if you don't mind, is just like saying that again, rhythm replaces strength. If you have a startup in your meeting always where you're saying, all right, here we go. These are the roles. This is the desired outcomes. This is how the decisions will be made. You can really kind of get everyone clear about who they are, what they're doing, and then you can easily put those bumpers in. Here's how we'll work together today. And getting that agreement. Does anyone need to add anything to this? Is anyone unclear? Can anyone not agree? It just takes a moment, but to take that time of making sure people say, yep, we're on board. I
Yeah.
think it's really
And
powerful.
these all fall in the category of preventions. That's the thing. You're preventing anything, that you don't want to have happen to occur. So that's all you're setting yourself up for success, and the whole group. And that's the thing to remember. They're going to appreciate it. They're going to appreciate what's in and out of scope of the meeting. And I think that's what you're doing here.
Yeah, and I think too when you the preventions, when you set those preventions, it's not only on us to go back to them if we need to, but you enable others to go back to that if you need to.
Yeah.
When you say it out loud like that,
Yes,
anyone can go back and support the better functioning of the meeting.
absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So Rachel, what's the best way for a facilitator who's also wants to participate and give a perspective? That's our final question today. What can you do? How do you do that? The best way for you to play a role as participant as well as facilitator.
Yeah, I'm glad that someone brought this question because this is a tricky thing. And if I'm reading between the line, this might even be a well-intentioned leader too that doesn't want to put their thumb on the scale too much, wants to hear from people who are close to the work. And so we really need to be intentional about how we participate, how we bring our own perspective when we also have that extra lever of control of managing the process. So generally what I would say is just think about who's in the room, what kind of information that you need, and make a conscious choice about when you add your input. And when you do add that input, you can just say it out loud, make it visible to people, make it explicit. Like, I'm going to be the facilitator tasked with managing the process. At some point, I may have to change hats because I'm also close to this work and I have a point of view about the outcome, or I'm accountable to the outcome, or whatever it is. And then when it gets time to change that hat, say, all right, I'm speaking as a subject matter expert here, or I'm moving out of the role of facilitator for a second. I want to share my opinion, right? So there's a way to just let people know what you're doing when you're doing it and also do it in a way that has some thought behind it. I don't recommend being the facilitator and say, okay, I'm going to kick off the conversation and let everybody know what I think, because that just it that's the direction you have too much control over steering everyone, bending them to your will in that instance. What do you think? What might you add to that,
Yeah,
Beth?
no, I agree. One time somebody once said to me, being a facilitator is like hosting a party at your house. You don't go first. You let the guests eat first. So that's the thing that kind of stuck in my mind, is to let them go first, and then then I would say something like, "Oh, there's something I'd like to add here," because I love your analogy at the beginning of this. Is you don't want to put your thumb on the scale of you influencing untoward. You don't want to do that. So if you really are open to their input or whatever it is, I would just gently let them go first.
Yeah, great. I love it. Well, I think we've managed to answer most of our questions here. Everything else we answered in the webinar. So if you didn't catch that, we'll have a recording available. And Beth, it's always a treat to spend some
Thank
time.
you. Thank you, Rachel.